The reason people are on my side are because I'm on the right side of history and on the right side of the issues. But we also know that polls are a snapshot. The question is, who are they taking a picture of? When I'm going across this state, the people I'm talking to are excited about this election, but they also know that they're often left out of the conversation. Students who have found themselves struggling to finish college because they don't have access to financial aid. Families that are struggling to decide between food on their table and healthcare costs. Families facing rising prices. And everyone I've met is afraid of the gun violence and the rising violence in the state. I do not believe that I'm behind. I believe that I'm making the case for Georgia, the case for electing me as the next governor, because the current failures we have seen in this state are not only damning, they are disqualifying. And over the next few years, we have an opportunity to change the trajectory of the state, and I look forward to leading our state forward.
Can you tell us right now whether you'd push for these measures or any other additional restrictions on abortion now that the 2019 law is in effect?
No, I would not. I mean, look, we were at many campaign events. People come up, secret recordings, couldn't completely understand the conversation that's going on. But no, that's not my desire to do that. Georgians should know that my desire is to continue to help them fight through 40-year high inflation and high gas prices and other things that our Georgia families are facing right now, quite honestly, because of bad policies in Washington, D.C. from President Biden and the Democrats that have complete control. And thankfully, working with the Georgia General Assembly, we've been able to work to help give some relief to people despite what's happening in Washington, like giving a income tax credit back to our citizens, cutting taxes, also suspending the gas tax since March now, $800 million of relief for our hardworking citizens. So that is what my focus has been on, and it's what it will continue to be on.
Needs to be done here. How should Georgia address the issues surrounding marijuana?
I guess a perfect question for a libertarian. We believe that cannabis is a plant that grows from earth naturally, and the hubris that the federal government has shown in making a Schedule I drug while also holding patents on it is one of those things where we find it somewhat laughable. And it is. It is a right of people. It is medicine. It is something that we can add to our industry here in Georgia and really displace a lot of what comes in from outside of Georgia. This is a huge win for Georgia. We have a great agricultural sector. We can grow 2 bumper crops of cannabis every year. The idea that it is still illegal and that Brian Kemp has talked about this and tweeted about it as it is a good thing when we make cannabis bust and cannabis bust only is a real sign that the government in Georgia is using it for the prison industrial complex, for the law enforcement complex to go after communities that would like to see freedom in this area. So it's a right. That's how we see it as libertarians.
All right. Thank you very much.
At a time when our healthcare workers are already suffering from burnout, from increased demand and workloads. Many are now facing care that will be delayed or unavailable, while our state's capital will soon have only one Level 1 trauma center. What will you do to ensure Georgians have access to critical healthcare services and hospitals?
Well, I would just remind voters at home there's also hospitals being built across this state and new options for people for health care. Look, the AMC situation was something that was thrown on a lot of political leaders, including me. But instead of complaining about it and doing the blame game, I went and worked with Fulton County, with DeKalb County, with Democrats to come up with a solution that put state resources into Grady to help make sure people have the access and the care that they need in our state. And I'm committed to continuing to do that in the future.
Mr. Hazel, you ran for Congress in 2018. That was just 4 years ago. You ran as a Republican. You got less than 30% of the vote in the Republican primary. What happened between then and now that made you a libertarian?
Oh, I actually came back to my roots as a libertarian. We believe in freedom. We saw what the Republican Party was. We saw what the Democratic Party was. They are force and coercion. No matter what they talk about, it's force and coercion. Whether it's certificate of need for hospitals, whether it is taking guns away from law-abiding citizens, it is always force and coercion at the point of a gun from the Democrats and Republicans. To look at life through consent, the eyes that, hey, we can all have transactions. We do it every day in the private sector. 99.9% of us go throughout our day without raping people, without murdering people, without pointing guns at people to take their property. That is not what the government does under Republicans and Democrats, period. That's how I became a libertarian. This is why we're going to send this thing into a runoff. And if people were really looking for something to change, you'd vote libertarian. You'd send a message to both of these parties, because one of these people will most likely be the executive in a rigged system, that you want to be more free.
So my question for Ms. Abrams tonight is, how many sheriffs statewide have publicly endorsed your campaign?
Mr. Kemp, what you are attempting to do is continue the lie that you've told so many times. I think you believe it's the truth. I support law enforcement and did so for 11 years, worked closely with the Sheriff's Association. I'm probably the only person standing here who's ever actually written a SOP for a police department when I was working for the city of Atlanta. But I have two brothers, one who has committed crimes, and I want his victims to be able to call the police and get the help they need, and I've always supported that right. But I have another brother who has faced being pulled over for driving while black when he was coming back from his job as a social worker. Unlike you, I don't have the luxury of relying on slogans to describe my position on public safety. I believe that we need safety and justice because I love both of my brothers. And like most Georgians, I lead a complicated life where we need access to help, but we also need to know that we are safe from racial violence. While you may not have had that experience, too many people I know have, and that is why I will always stand up for making certain that safety and justice are the conversations we're having in Georgia and the delivery we have as the next governor of Georgia.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Mr. Kemp.
Well, I would just tell people that, look, I support safety and justice, but Ms. Abrams refused to answer the question, so I'll let you know that the answer is zero. No sheriffs are endorsing her statewide because of her stances on wanting to defund the police, eliminate cash bail, and serving on the boards of organizations like the Margaret Casey Foundation that supports and gives grants to organizations that are promoting the defund the police movement.
If I may respond, because he actually lied there.
Yes, 30
I do
seconds.
have the support of sheriffs, but unlike Mr. Kemp, I do not make it my plan to list every person who supports me. I have the support of sheriffs, I have the support of advocates, I have the support of victims, I have the support of those who want to be treated fairly in our system. I have to have conversations with the entirety of Georgia. I don't have the luxury of being a part of a good old boys club where we don't focus on the needs of our people. And that is why my mission has been to put out very concrete plans explaining how I will serve justice, how I will serve safety, and how I will serve the citizens of the state of Georgia.
30 seconds, Brian Kemp.
Well, look, I would just tell people, I know Ms. Abrams is upset and mad because these are things that she said. This is not me making this up. This is things that she said in interviews that she's done, and she's sitting on organizations that you can go look at the facts yourself. And that's why the men and women in law enforcement want a governor that is going to stand with them, who has been with them, not only to have their back, but also stand shoulder to shoulder on things like civil unrest and going after street gangs and human traffickers.
Thank you very much. Stacey Abrams, you get the next question for Shane Hazel.
Mr. Hazel, Republicans and Democrats have raised the alarm over the rise in the Chinese Communist Party-backed companies purchasing American farmland. To date, they've purchased more than 1 million acres of farmland in the state of Georgia. Would you agree with Mike Pompeo that allowing those purchases in the state of Georgia is a sign of madness? And would you be concerned about the national security implications of the Chinese Communist Party purchasing this land with the support of the state of Georgia?
I see the setup for this question. I understand why it was projected at me. As libertarians, we believe that you own your property and that the state can't take it away from you and can't sell it or can't determine who you sell it to. The CCP, obviously, which is going through its own internal unrest right now, I believe is probably purchasing this with things like central bank digital dollars and yuan, which are also coming down to a critical nature where people are in uprising in China. What we need to look at is how these purchases are being made. Are we accepting fiat, CCP yuan in Georgia as an actual currency? It's about as good as the U.S. currency, the fiat currency that we're about to have hoisted on us in terms of a CBDC. I'm not going to tell you or anybody else as governor how or who to sell your property to. And I imagine that in the end, the free market will work itself out.
Thank you. Stacey Abrams, 30 seconds.
The state of Georgia is watching our farmland be purchased by the Chinese Communist Party. And while that is not normally a conversation that we have, it is something that we should be concerned about. Agriculture is our #1 industry, and Georgia has 13 military installations. The fact that the state of Georgia is working with the Chinese Communist Party, using one of their technologies that both Donald Trump and Joe Biden have warned is very much a national security threat, should be of great concern to every Georgian. This is not about being concerned simply about who's owning the land, but it's about how much access to our information they have because of the state.
Thank you. Shane Hazel, you may ask your question of Stacey Abrams.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. The military-industrial complex is a big problem. It is, and the fact that we have people trying to come here to, I don't know, get a backdoor into our military. I think one of the things we should be talking about as Georgians and as executives is the Defend the Guard Act, where our military has been used very, I don't know, haphazardly around the world to go and take resources from the Middle East, or now in Ukraine.
Mr. Hazel, your question.
This is my question to who?
To Stacey Abrams.
Oh, we've already switched gears.
Yes.
My question to you, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I have hearing problems, guys. My question to you is, I mentioned CBDCs. As the executive of Georgia, when we come into a CBDC from the Federal Reserve, will you, as the executive, accept this CCCP-style currency?
I believe that the conversation about currency is a complicated one. And part of the challenge we have is how this currency is transmitted, the very real security threats with digital currency, the hacking and mining of that digital currency should concern all Georgians. As the governor of Georgia, I will work very closely with the Federal Reserve, but also with the innovators and the entrepreneurs who do see an opportunity. But before we take a step forward that could put us at risk, our responsibility is to understand the complexity of what is happening with these transactions. And as exciting as it is, we also know it's deeply problematic when we do not have the adequate safeguards in place. That's one of the reasons I've raised concerns about WeChat and about the purchase of farmland. But what we know overall is that we need a governor who's conversant in these issues, who understands that, for example, in the state of Georgia, we have access to $3.5 billion in American currency that could be delivered tomorrow to save our hospitals and to save our lives. But our current governor has refused to accept those dollars. My intention is to do what's best for the state of Georgia every single day.
Thank you. Shane Hazel, you get a 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah. Working with the Federal Reserve, who's got us into the mess that we are in right now because of a centralized fiat currency, it will be absolutely worthless. They will be dangling carrots in front of the governor, in front of the executives, in front of the legislature to do exactly what their mandates are. If they are mandating that they take the property of people, then they will do it. If they want to invade your homes, your privacy, your businesses, they will do it because of CBDCs.
All right. Stacey Abrams, please ask your question to Brian Kemp.
Absolutely. Mr. Kemp, under your leadership, there is currently a 100-year gap between minority-owned businesses and majority-owned businesses. Although minorities comprise 48% of the population, they only generate 12.2% of the business revenue in the state. And under every analysis that we have seen, it will take 100 years to close that gap, given the current process that you have in place. You served 4 years in the Senate, 8 years as Secretary of State in charge of businesses. You served 4 years as governor. What are your concrete, specific, targeted plans to decrease and address the racial equity gap currently facing contracting and purchasing for minority-owned businesses?
Governor Kemp?
Well, I would remind Georgians that the first part of my plan was keeping our state open for business and allowing all business people and working Georgians to work when Stacey Abrams was criticizing me for doing that. Also pushing to get our kids back in the classroom when, again, Stacey Abrams was criticizing me for doing that. A lot of Georgians, including African Americans and other minorities, cannot go to work if their kids are not in the classroom. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the country for African Americans. We also were named we're in the top 10 of the states for black entrepreneurship in the state of Georgia. So our economy is incredible, and we will continue to work with all of those entrepreneurs in the days ahead and working class Georgians, because we are the ones that have been fighting for you when Miss Abrams was not. We were giving tax refunds. We were doing tax cuts. We were suspending the gas tax to help you deal with 40-year high inflation when she was criticizing us.
Stacey Abrams, 30-second rebuttal.
I would point out that Mr. Kemp did not address the needs of purchasing and contracts for Black and Brown-owned businesses, which is what he has refused to do for the last 16 years. We know that $10.9 billion has been delivered to the state of Georgia through 2 recent acts at the congressional level. And Brian Kemp does not have a plan for making certain that people of color have access to those contracts, access to purchasing. It was only in July of this year that he finally acknowledged that there might be a problem. He has said that we need to study it. I would tell him, just cheat off of my paper. I know the answer. We need a governor who actually believes in equity, racial equity, economic equity in the state of Georgia, and I will deliver.
Thank you. Shane Hazel, please ask your question to Brian Kemp.
Brian, in 2020, on April 2nd, you locked down Georgia, threatening peaceful people with force and coercion. You called people in Georgia non-essential, and it killed millions of jobs. You bent the knee to Big Pharma and pushed a vaccine that was untested on people, and it has killed people. They have lost their loved ones. You've allowed bureaucracy to invade our businesses. And then you had the audacity to brag about record tax revenue. You want to say sorry to anybody?
So is that a question, or?
That is a question. Do you want to say sorry to anybody?
Well, look, I'll be glad to talk about my record because obviously Mr. Hazel is gravely mistaken. If you look at the executive orders that I signed, we said every business in Georgia was essential. There was a few that we asked to help us stop the spread, flatten the curve, build PPE supplies and hospital bed capacities, because unlike him, I was getting the calls from hospitals saying, hey, we are out of surgical gowns. We're out of masks. We need ventilators. And we were literally working 24/7 to supply those items while also keeping our economy open in this state. And as you know, I was the first state to open the small parts that we asked to close, and our recovery's been as good as any state in the country. We have had 2 record years of economic development because of our business environment, working with the General Assembly to make sure that we're putting Georgians first and Georgia businesses and Georgia workers first, and that's what I'm committed to continuing to do.
30 seconds, Mr. Hazel.
You should have put Georgia freedom first, period. You didn't have the power to lock down businesses, and you signed the executive order on April 2nd. It was clear as day. I sat there and watched you do it, and I was like, there is no coming back from this. The idea that the default was to lock down Georgia instead of trusting Georgians with their freedom to adapt in a time of very changing circumstances, I think is a tyrant move, and I think the left and right are fascist and communist socialists, whereas we're talking about real liberty, trusting Georgians with those decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Hazel. Brian Kemp, you have the final question in this round for Shane Hazel.
Well, I would just ask Mr. Hazel if he supports the things that we have done because we were open and Georgians were working and we've had excess revenue. So instead of doing big government...
That's our tax money.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't support it because here's the thing is, when we get to that point, when we talk about what you're doing...
I was fixing to ask my
finish your question.
Please go ahead.
I would just say, do you support the tax cuts we've done, returning $1 billion of taxpayer money and suspending the gas tax for Georgians to help fight through 40-year high inflation and bad domestic energy policy?
Georgia, I hope you hear me when I say libertarians think taxation is theft. It's your money. It's your property. Yeah. You should be able to determine what you do with it. I don't support the fact that you haven't ended qualified immunity. I don't support the fact that you haven't ended civil asset forfeiture. I don't support the fact that you haven't ended the drug war. You haven't ended nonviolent crime. You haven't ended cash bail. You haven't ended no-knock raids. You haven't implemented community review boards. And you haven't banned blacked-out cop cars that go after people for more money. It's ridiculous. De-escalation by the executive to leave peaceful people alone in the state of Georgia. That's my message to both of you, to everybody in the state who wears a badge. Stop going after peaceful people.
Mr. Kemp, 30-second rebuttal.
Well, that's simply not true. As Georgians know, I have followed the laws and the Constitution of this state. And I ran on going after criminal street gangs because I knew there was an issue in our state when other people wouldn't even talk about it and the media wouldn't acknowledge it. And you look at the amount of fentanyl that's coming across the southern border because of bad border policies from this administration. Every governor in the country is having to deal with that. So yes, I'm going to go after bad people that are selling bad drugs and killing our children and our other citizens.
The free market way to do that would be to allow cannabis and psilocybin to handle the mental health issues.
Mr.
Okay, well, I
Hazel,
wasn't
we're gonna
talking
move on.
about cannabis. I was talking about deadly fentanyl.
Gentlemen,
Stop busting them then.
Gentlemen, we're going to move on.
The government education system that came from Prussia in the 1700s has obviously failed Americans. We don't understand economics. We don't understand our civil culture. We don't understand a whole lot about what goes on behind the scenes in politics. The idea that we want to privatize everything as libertarians is good for education. Think about Walmart having a monopoly on force to teach your children. It's insane. The idea that we do this with a government has side effects. We see them on a daily basis. We need to get government out of education. We need to allow parents to seek out the best education for their kids. And we also believe that they have the responsibility to do so. So to help fix this nation, start here in Georgia, is get the government and the admin out of the classroom and get it out of our lives.
Thank you.
Let's begin with what my proposals are. Georgia is sitting on a $6.6 billion surplus. That's money that we have after we've paid every bill, after we've put 15% aside for, say, a rainy day fund. That is money that after we've accounted for increases in population. And I want to invest it in our children and in our families, beginning with making certain that we have pre-K slots. We have 4-year-olds on a waiting list. I've never met a 4-year-old who waits to turn 5. But we can solve that problem with the money we have right now. We can also give an $11,000 pay raise to our teachers instead of a $5,000 pay raise on layaway.